Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and I'm here with the co-chair of the Government Affairs Committee of the Burlington Area Chamber of Commerce, Kelly Pappas. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Ken.
This is a show I've been looking forward to for about 4 years now, because we're going to talk about a program that was just signed into law by the governor last week, paid family and medical leave. I made that comment because I've been working on this program for all of that time. I filed the bill in 2015 and 2017, and I authored much of that program. And it's much of the program that the bill that went to the governor and was signed into law was based on. And what we're going to do is talk about essentially how it affects all of you, whether you're a business owner or a worker. How are things going to change when this program is eventually rolled out? Kelly is here because you speak for the business community in Burlington as a member of the Chamber and on government affairs.
I do, and as a Burlington resident, so both sides of the table here.
And you live here, you're an employee, so
Yes.
you'll be affected by that on that end.
Yes.
You're also a wife and a mother, so you'll be
Yes.
affected on that end. You might be a sister, I'm not sure.
Sister, I am. Sister, niece, all of the above.
And
Absolutely.
on that end too, and maybe even a granddaughter. So in all of those roles, as a family member of a person who works, as the person who works, and as the person who operates the business that employs the person who works, all of these things are intertwined and will change when this program is rolled out. Benefits will start to be paid in 2021 and fully be up and running by July of 2021.
So I've spoken to some people who, just some friends, and I think the question that I keep getting is, what does this mean for me? How is this going to impact me as an employee? And I work for a small business, so
Right.
my employer as well.
Right. So this is what paid family and medical leave does. It will provide wage replacement for all of the 3.1 million workers in Massachusetts, unless you work for a town or a city, a municipality, or the federal government. A municipality can opt into the program through a vote of town meeting, in the case of Burlington or Bedford or city council and other places. We have no jurisdiction over federal employees, however. So most of the 3.1 will be part of this program. What it will do is that there's the medical leave portion and the family leave portion of this program. The medical leave portion really addresses what we now have as temporary disability, or we address through temporary disability insurance. And what that says is if you go out with a non-workplace related illness or injury, then you'll have up to 20 weeks after a 7-day waiting period to be part of this program, and a portion of your wages will be replaced through a fund that will create from employer and employee contributions. We'll unpack that in a moment, but from a general concept, a fund is created. If you go out, you're in the hospital or you're under constant medical care, you'll be able to be paid through this fund. Your employer will now have you off their books during the time that you're out on leave, so that they can use the money they would have used for your salary to pay someone to replace the work that would otherwise be done by the person out on leave. That's the medical part of it. The family leave part of it is that if the employee has experiences the birth or adoption of a child, or foster adoption of a child, foster care of a child, or if a family member becomes subject to hospitalization or constant medical care. That's the illness or injury that I won't say that again, but illness or injury means serious illness or injury.
Requiring hospitalization.
Right, not a cold, not a flu, not an ear infection. And they both have this 7 calendar day waiting period. So we're talking about, you've been sick for a little while now. It's, again, the earaches just aren't going to be part of this program. I know some people have thought that, so I just want to be clear that this is when, we're talking about a heart attack. We're talking about, something like cancer, when it's your own condition. With the family leave, the employee now has up to 12 weeks to be with that child or spouse, or as I said, a parent or sibling, if there's a need for that employee to be with that person. There's documentation that has to be provided in every step of the way. But that's what'll happen. So starting in 2021, if a person needs to be with a family member, if the person has to be in the hospital, there's now a place they can go to get some income while they're convalescing or while their family member is convalescing.
And how much is the income reimbursement going to be?
Well, it's subject to a formula. I'll start sort of high and then work down a little bit more granular. But the theory behind it, and frankly this comes from the bill that I filed, was a minimum wage worker will get a higher percentage of their wage replaced because a minimum wage worker really had no opportunity to save money for a rainy day, whereas someone making maybe 6 figures has had that opportunity. Whether they did or they didn't, we can't control that. But they'll get something, just not as high a percentage. And so what we do is we take the state average weekly wage, which is currently around $1,200, and we divide that by 2. So currently around $600 is the base for our formula. The worker will get 80% of the $600, 80% of half of the state's average weekly wage. So if you're a minimum wage worker currently, you're making $440 a week, right? $11 times 40, if we're looking at a 40-hour worker. So you'll see that there's not much space between the 440 and the 600 that the 80 applies to. If you're minimum wage, you're in that space, and that's what you'll get. And if you're making slightly more than that, that's what you'll get. Once you hit the $600 under the current state average weekly wage, then your income is replaced at 50%. Excuse me, 50%. So the arc will start to slope down. So if most of your wages are more than $600 currently, then it'll be less than 50% wage replacement because of that formula. Now remember that minimum wage will go up by the time this starts in 2021.
Right.
It'll be $13.50 at that point. So the state's average weekly wage will probably go up as well. The numbers will change a little bit, but I'm just using today's number to explain how that will work. So that first smaller chunk of someone's income will be replaced at 80%, and then it'll go to 50%.
And so is that 50% of the average weekly wage the maximum amount payable?
No, that's a good question. So the maximum amount payable is $850 a week.
Okay.
So there's a cap. There was a Senate proposal and a House proposal. I'd sort of go back to that because it's the way it all started. Our House proposal, the cap was at $650. The Senate was at $1,000. The ballot question was at $1,000 that was filed. So they sort of met that one in the middle.
Okay.
And the payments will be provided through a combination, basically 50-50. There's another more complicated formula, but this time I'll spare you that. It ends up that employees and employers are paying half of the premium to pay in. So the way this is funded is that we will deduct 0.63% of people's income as withholding. The people are used to seeing withholding for Social Security or their taxes and things like that. To give you an idea, Social Security takes, I think, 6%, and then there's another 1% for Medicaid, withholding and things like that. This is essentially 2/3 of 1%, 2/3 of a percent. So it's a smaller number that will come out, and it won't even be 2/3 because that 2/3 is the 0.63%. Since it's split between employer and employee, the employee will see half of that.
Okay.
So 1/3 of 1% will come out, average of about $2.25 a week for an average paid worker in Massachusetts. A minimum wage worker will see about $1.75 a week come out.
So we're talking anywhere between $50 to $100 per year.
Per year, right.
Basically.
Right.
Is there a cap on that as well?
The cap is when the person gets to the Social Security minimum, which is currently $128,000. And then that premium will no longer be taken. For the employer, no, the law really is that the employer is assessed the charge, but may charge back the employee for up to 1/2. So technically speaking, they don't have to do that. We expect most will. But the employer is not charged their half if they have 25 or fewer employees.
So then if there are 25 or fewer employees, the employee will pay, but the employer will not.
Right.
Okay, and above 25 employees, the employer can handle the entire deduction by themselves, or they can split that 50-50 with the employee.
Correct.
Okay, understood. So in Burlington, we have a lot of small businesses. We have a lot of large businesses. Has there been discussions about the impact that this will have to smaller businesses?
There have, and before this was passed into law, I spoke to a number of small businesses and kind of created my own survey, but there have been other surveys done, especially of businesses that have already experienced the program in other states. But going back to your question, certainly when you ask a small business about a program that will cost them some money, any money, the initial reaction is, I'm done with this.
Right.
It's not, we're not talking about an additional $2 or $3 a week. We're talking about $2 or $3 a week more than what I already have to pay, and I'm already pretty overburdened. But then when they hear about what this program does, and specifically when they hear that what it does is it also provides job protection for that employee, go back to the answer to that question. So when they hear that what happens is, I spoke to one of the sub shops in town, the delis in town really, and I spoke to the owner. He said, we had a worker go out with a heart attack last year, and another had a hospitalization the year before. And we paid them as much as we could because they've been here for 8, 9, 10 years, and they're valuable. Unemployment is low right now in our area. It's hard to find good workers.
Right.
And once you have one, you really don't want to let that person go. So he said, I tried to pay them as much as I could, but I had to get the work done. So he paid part-timers to do the work that the worker out on leave couldn't do because he was in the hospital.
So basically he's incurring more costs, which I assume a lot of small businesses are doing when they have key employees.
Right.
So they're paying the employee to be out, yet they're also paying additional wages on top of that.
So his cost for leave, when he initially thought it was nothing, his cost was actually the part-time hours that he had to pay the part-timer to do the work of the full-timer, because that salary was already being paid to the full-timer out on leave, which was about $2,000 when all was said and done. This program will be a lot less than that. And if that business had 25 or fewer employees, it would be zero. For the employer side to be able to use this program. So what would be a relief to him, to that owner, who actually paid that worker out on leave. But I spoke with other companies that said, I would love to pay my workers out on leave, but our margins are so tight that I can't do it. So I've paid 2 weeks, 1 week. You can imagine that you're in the hospital and you have the stress of, I don't know how I'm going to pay the rent because I haven't, I'm low paid and I haven't been able to save much. And the rent is still due. The landlord doesn't want to hear about it. And the owners of the businesses know that. So what do, right? They want to be able to help, especially those workers that are, they're shown loyalty to them and they want to show it back. The other problem is that if they say, looking at my business for a moment, as opposed to the point of view of the employee, but I need to get this work done. And if I'm less than 50 employees, then federal FAMLA doesn't apply to me. There's no job protection. I can let that person go.
Right.
And in order to get this work done, if I can't pay them both, I may have to choose to pay the one that is working, because we're talking about perhaps up to 20 weeks. If it's a real serious, maybe 2 months for a heart attack. I'm not sure what the current treatment protocol is, but whatever the doctor says it is, they may say, I can't find anyone to do the work in that time. I have to let this person go. It pains me to do that, but that's what ends up happening. And so now that person, when they're better, has to get a different job. As I said, unemployment is low. They probably will find work. But the person who owns the business now has to find a new worker, train a new worker. The risk that worker isn't going to be up to speed, or really the likelihood is they're not going to certainly be as up to speed as the experienced worker anytime soon. So there's a problem there that's being solved for that business owner through this program. The problem for the worker is sort of obvious. You can see that, for example, if you have a child, to be able to spend 12 weeks and make, say, 2/3 of your income, or if you're a minimum wage worker, 80% of your income, you don't have to rush back to work. I mean, that's a family value right there.
Absolutely.
If you've adopted a child, you'd be able to do that now.
Are there other states that are doing this?
So that's a great question. So currently, California's been doing it for about 12 to 15 years now. New Jersey does it. Rhode Island does it. New York has had a very small program involving paid family and medical leave, but they expanded it. And Washington just became the first state to start this program without having anything in place that went before it, similar to Massachusetts.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just said a mouthful, but this is what that means. California, New Jersey, and Rhode Island already had a temporary disability insurance program that started in about the 40s. What they did was they added a benefit. They said the family portion now will be a qualifying event. So before we would pay out if you went to the hospital, now we'll pay out if you have a child. So they were able to create that program 15 years ago, 10 years ago for New Jersey, and 5 years ago for Rhode Island. But their infrastructure was already in place. It wasn't that hard. New York had a program. It was really underfunded and used very little. But they said, okay, let's just beef up the program we already had. So they also had something already in place. When it came to any other state, those were all the states that have had something. So the next state to implement this program had to start from scratch. Massachusetts has to build its own model to collect the money, pay out the money, oversee how the program works, oversee appeals and things like that. Washington, the state of Washington, is in the same position. And about 6 months ago, they voted to do what we're doing in a very similar program. Ours is I'm from here, it's a little bit better, but they're both great programs. And we've worked together with the state of Washington. A lot of things they've thought about in the past few months. I've called them and said, how do you address this issue or that? But we have a great benefit being able to start from scratch, because this is 2018 and our technology has grown exponentially in the last several years. And so we're not burdened with some of the mistakes that have gone on in the past, because some of the mistakes that have gone on in the past are based on these mainframe computer models that we don't have to use anymore. In fact, the administration looked into, can we make this part of an existing program? Why do we have to create this new department of family and medical leave? And each time they looked into it, and I had looked into it previously, is, you know what? We're better off to start a modern, technologically modern system that doesn't have all those burdens.
And building it right the first time.
And building it right, which we can. It's amazing. The federal government was involved in that part of our plan. And I went to Washington several times, and they talked about how some of these bright minds coming out of our best schools, some of which are right here in Massachusetts.
Many of which are local, yeah.
Were called to fix a lot of the problems that the federal government had, for example, when the ACA came out. And we know that it crashed in the beginning. And it was based on one of these off-the-shelf models, because that's tried and true. And so people who don't want to take a lot of risks will look to that and say, let's modify one thing or the other. But when that crashed, the call went out to these engineers, these software engineers coming out of MIT and Stanford in this case. And they went to a hotel in Maryland, because I met with them. And they said it took us 2 weeks, but we came out with an ACA product that actually worked. And then every week we'd make it a little better, and then a little better, and a little better, and they collaborate. It's fascinating. It looks like a giant mess in the place where they're working, but they're all collaborating. And they're all leaving sticky notes for each other on the walls. And it's what we can do to build this program. So what happened then was that President Obama at the time took that and built a division under the General Services Administration, the GSA. They call it Section 18F. But Section 18F's job was to go through the federal government, audit all of their technological programs and make it better. And they're available to the states.
Oh, good.
So they're still available for us to consult. We can contract with them, and I hope we do.
So this is going to be a new department within our state government?
Right. It'll be within the administration, within the governor's administration. It will be, like I said, the Department of Family and Medical Leave. And so that's where businesses will go. And essentially what will happen, and I've seen this dashboard, an employee will sit before a dashboard, and let's say they've had a baby. And they'll, by the way, you're asked to give 30 days notice to join the program. And that might work if you're having a baby. It doesn't mean you'll be held to it, because we never know if it's a delivery date or not.
Right.
But there's some notice that can be given. If it's not practical, then it's not required. But let's say you go on your computer, a dashboard comes out, and it says, enter the name of your employer. Well, the computer will know through the drop down where your employer will be because of the unemployment insurance system. We're all coded. So you'll start typing and then your employer comma comes out. And then what's the condition? And because of coding, if it's a medical condition, because of how billing is done, each of the conditions are done. Who's your doctor? That'll be on the screen. And again, because doctors all bill for conditions, so that comes out. So it's pretty easy through drop downs to give this profile you need, right? And then they'll ask you, okay, what's your salary? And that's an important question because not everybody will want to use this system. Some people have other benefits available to them. So you'll say, okay, my salary is, let's say it's $60,000 a year. It'll say this is what you're eligible for. And now you're thinking, okay, do I want to use vacation time, which is usually 100% wage replacement, or take this number? Can I afford this number and then I save my vacation time, which you can do. It's only a week. Is it worth it? Maybe I have some sick time still available to me at 100%. And that's an important part of this whole model, because since not everybody uses it, that keeps the price down. And the way we were able to determine that is we look at California, we look at New Jersey, we look at Rhode Island. When you asked previously about small business attitudes, there's a professor out of Columbia University named Jane Waldfogel, and she surveyed 250 Rhode Island businesses in 2015, I think it was. And she asked them 2 years after they went in had experience with this, or maybe it was a year after they had experience. So what do you think now? You've been using it. And in Rhode Island, 61% of their businesses were either favorable or very favorable to this program. So then last year, 2017, she went into New Jersey because they most recently came up with this, and she interviewed their 1,250 and asked the same question after they had experienced the program, and got basically the same result. In New Jersey, it was 2/3, 2-to-1. The businesses were either favorable or very favorable to the way that this affected their business.
That's impressive.
Right, right. So once the business sees how it works, they realize that they're benefiting from it as well.
You mentioned that if somebody has other insurance available, so if their employer is currently providing short-term disability, how does that play into the equations here?
So that's a very important question, because that was what the businesses really wanted the most at the end of this negotiation that we had with the Raise Up Massachusetts people, the proponents of the ballot question in a negotiation that resulted in this bill. They wanted this opt-out, is what you're saying. They want to say, look, I already provide this benefit to my employees, and I'd rather not get involved in a publicly administered fund. And so they can do that. What they've got to show the state is that they provide benefits at least equal to what this state provides. They'll still spend a few $100s a year on a fee because the state still has to oversee the program, make sure that it is operating as they said it would. So they're still going to oversee, they're going to monitor. And there'll have to be some place for the employee to appeal if they think a denial was unfair. But for the most part, they can opt out of the system. When we negotiated how this would come about, through these conversations, on paid family and medical leave, distinct from some of the other programs that were subject to this negotiation, there's a lot of changes you can make. The number of weeks that someone is eligible to get, or the maximum number of weeks, 12 weeks for a family, 20 for your own illness or injury. The number of benefits we added, I'll talk about it for a minute, a military benefit that wasn't in the original idea. We could, in the final proposal, businesses that have 25 or fewer employees are exempt from paying the employer side. All of this can happen, and each of it causes a reaction, usually a financial reaction. So we look at the 25 employees. That's a good idea for the smallest of businesses, and I think it's obvious why that's such a help for a small bakery that's saying we're struggling so much. But the money has to come from somewhere that's being taken from what otherwise would have been paid from them. So it will increase the premium for the larger businesses. The business association that negotiated on behalf of the employers it was headed by a group called the Associated Industries of Massachusetts. They felt it was more important to create this carve-out of the premiums for the smaller businesses, so they were willing to do that. What was important to the employee side was that everyone who works in Massachusetts has an opportunity to be part of the program. They didn't like the idea that because I may work for a small business that has 5 people, I can't join in. It's not
Right.
my fault that the business has 5 people. The businesses that only have 5 people said it's the hardest. I have a little bodega somewhere. It's hard for me to do this. So this is an opportunity so that they both can get what they need. And going along the way, that's how the bill, as I filed it, and the Senate filed it, had 26 weeks of benefit for your own illness or injury, the medical part. That came down to 20 because as we changed caps, as we made the 850 cap as opposed to the 1,000 or the 6, it all changed the pricing, it all changed that structure. But we could do it because of the negotiations that started in November, where the business community had a seat at the table, and they said, okay, we can handle that, but we want this in return. And your question led to that long explanation. The opt-out was,
Right.
was very important to them, and they were able to get that. And that was probably the last 2 weeks of the negotiation, is how we could create that opt-out without having it severely changing the premium for everybody else still in the program.
So the benefits go into effect in 21.
21, right.
When does the funding start?
The funding will start in 2020.
Okay.
Essentially what will happen is the next year, beginning today, so for the next year, we'll be in the design phase. The next year after that will be in the building phase. Essentially right now there isn't even a structure. Even if people wanted to pay in, there isn't a structure to receive the money. So after that's built, and that'll be 24 months from now, then we'll start collecting money so that premiums can, so that benefits can be paid out in the 3rd year, January 2021. In January 2021, the medical benefits are paid. The benefits for the birth or adoption of a child are paid, but the family benefits for ill family members, that will phase in on July 1, 2021.
Okay.
The military benefit was a new idea that I'm really proud is in there, is if you have a service person who comes back from active duty injured, now you'll have an opportunity to spend some time with that service person. And that comes under the family part of this. The service person may otherwise be employed, right, and come back and need some time to convalesce. So they'll be able to also use this program as well. And that's a 26-week maximum. And by the way, there's a 26-week maximum per year.
Okay.
So if you have an injury and a child in the same year, then you've got to put them together. You get 26 weeks a year.
Okay. And I guess my last question, are there protections built into the law that will say this money is purely for FMLA and nobody's going to borrow from it for anything else?
It's actually written into
Okay.
the law right now. This money can only be spent for benefits and overhead for this program. No one can borrow from it, no one can take from it, and it can't spend on anything else. It's also self-sustaining. After what might, and I think it's self-sustaining altogether. When I looked at it originally, I thought we might need a little bit of money to build the first part of the system. But once we're up and running, it means that we don't have to take from the general fund to pay benefits. So both, the general fund can't come into it to take money, and it won't raid the general fund to get money. Every year it's subject to an audit. And if we find that 0.63% is too much, we'll bring it down.
Okay.
And you know, we'll look at it. It could be because the 0.63% also deals with startup costs that will be taken care of after the first few years, and then it's just generating on itself. The 850, I should say, is also subject to the state's average weekly wage. If wages go way up, the 850 isn't going to make any sense anymore. So that also rides with the average wages in Massachusetts, that 50% of average weekly wage number.
Okay.
So this was derived out of a compromise. It started with negotiations in November. It went all the way through until last week. And I think it's the way legislation should be drafted. There was certainly a ballot question when it came to paid family and medical leave, that kicked in the negotiation. It gave it a time deadline to get this all done, which can sometimes be a good thing if you know you've got to get to a place.
Right.
But both sides there was a give and a take, and the ballot question really wasn't used as a hammer necessarily, because both sides listened to each other and both sides gave everyone a chance to be there. The committee chairmen were there from the legislature, kind of refereeing the situation, but the Associated Industries of Massachusetts negotiated in good faith from day one. Raise Up Massachusetts on the other side from day one. And on the business side, they welcomed groups like the Retailers Association of Massachusetts, the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, the High Tech Council, all had seats and to some extent came and went, with AIM driving the bus on that end, and they knew that AIM was available to listen to them, to voice their concerns. So in the end, we got legislation that brought in all the voices, brought them all together, and I think we got a great product, and it'll really improve the lives of our citizens and our businesses for the better. And I think everybody wins with this program.
Well, I think you've done a fine job, and I congratulate you and I congratulate the state.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Kelly. I
you.
see from our time that we've run out of time, maybe gone into a little bit of overtime, but this is an important program that I'm really happy to be able to explain. If you have any questions, my website's been posted on the under your screen. Please send any questions to me. And Kelly Pappas, thank you for being our guest and talking about paid family and medical leave. Good luck with the chamber.
Thank you
And
very
we hope
much.
to have you back soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. Tune in again.